There is a hidden power in a revenge that is served with a velvet touch and a steady, unwavering hand. Witness the smooth, calculated path of those who finally took back what was theirs. Hit subscribe now and see the ultimate price of a broken promise.
You really think a receptionist's salary is going to pay for a place like this? Let the adults handle the real money, sweetheart. My brother said that to me while standing in the kitchen of the house I bought, holding a glass of my wine, wearing my father's old watch that he'd taken from the drawer without asking. I had just walked through the front door after a 12-hour shift to find him and his wife already rearranging my furniture. He smiled when he saw my face. "Relax, Nora. We're family." I set my bag down slowly. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just looked at him and made a decision he didn't see coming. But before I tell you how I legally dismantled everything he thought he owned, tell me in the comments, what is the most entitled thing a sibling has ever done to you? I read every single one. I need to take you back 18 months because what happened in my kitchen that night didn't start there. It started the day our father died. My father was a civil engineer who spent 30 years building a modest life in Columbus, Ohio. He wasn't a wealthy man by most standards, but he was careful. He owned a duplex on Elmwood Avenue, a 2-unit property he had maintained since before I was born. He lived in the upper unit. He rented the lower one. By the time he passed, the building was worth $480,000, fully paid off. No mortgage, no liens, just clean, solid equity that he had spent a lifetime protecting. He left it to both of us equally. 50% to my brother, Daniel. 50% to me. I was 28. Daniel was 34. On paper, that sounds fair. In practice, it was the starting pistol for the longest count I've ever witnessed up close. I should explain something about Daniel. My brother has a specific talent that I spent most of my childhood mistaking for charm. He is extraordinarily good at making you feel like you were the problem. When we were kids and he broke something, you somehow ended up apologizing. When he borrowed money and didn't pay it back, you felt guilty for bringing it up. He had perfected the art of reframing reality so that his comfort was always someone else's responsibility. Our mother called it his personality. I eventually learned a different word for it. After the funeral, Daniel sat me down at the kitchen table of our childhood home with a yellow legal pad and a pen. He had a plan, he said. A sensible one. We shouldn't try to co-own the duplex. Too complicated, too many decisions, too much friction. We should sell it, split the cash, and move on cleanly. Fresh start for both of us. I told him I didn't want to sell. I was already living in a rented studio 20 minutes away. I wanted to move into the upper unit, manage the building myself, and let the rental income from the lower unit help me build something stable. I had watched my father do exactly that for 30 years. I knew how it worked. Daniel leaned back and nodded slowly. "That makes sense," he said. "You always were the responsible one." He said it like a compliment, but there was something underneath it that I didn't catch until much later. He needed me to believe I was the responsible one, the one who would take on the burden, the paperwork, the maintenance calls at 2 a.m., while he collected his half of the passive value without lifting a finger. We agreed I would buy him out over time. Monthly payments drawn from the rental income and my own salary, a private arrangement between siblings. He suggested we keep it informal. No lawyers, no written contract, just a payment schedule he typed up on his phone and texted to me. I should have known right there. But grief does something to your judgment. It makes the familiar feel safe. And Daniel had always been the older one, the one who handled things, the one who knew better. I moved into the upper unit 3 weeks after the funeral. I repainted every room. I fixed the leak under the bathroom sink that my father had been meaning to get to for 2 years. I found a new tenant for the lower unit, a quiet graduate student named Patrick who paid on time every month without fail. I started making Daniel's payments like clockwork. $1,500 on the first of every month, transferred directly to his account. Documented in my own records even though he had never asked me to keep any. For 14 months, I did everything right. Then Daniel lost his job. He had been in sales, medical devices, decent commission, the kind of income that funds a lifestyle slightly larger than it should be. His wife Renee didn't work. They had 2 kids in private school and a lease on a house in Westerville with a kitchen renovation they'd started and not finished. When the layoff came, the whole structure wobbled. He called me on a Tuesday evening. His voice had that particular texture, soft, slightly wounded, that I recognized from childhood as the prelude to a request. "I know you're working hard over there, Nora," he said. "I just need a little time." A few months. You don't have to keep sending the payments while I'm getting back on my feet. I paused the payments. Of course I did. He was my brother. 3 months became 5. 5s became 8. Somewhere in there, Renee started posting vacation photos on Instagram. Hilton Head. A long weekend in Nashville. A birthday dinner at a steakhouse that I recognized from a food blog I followed. I didn't say anything. I told myself it was savings, or credit cards, or none of my business. I told myself I was not going to be the kind of person who monitors their family's spending. When I brought up the payments again, gently, carefully, the way you're trained to approach a stray animal, Daniel sighed. He said the arrangement we had was never really a buyout, legally speaking. He said he had looked into it. He said that since there was no formal contract, no deed transfer, no recorded lien, his name was still on the title, which meant he still owned 50% of the property. Which meant, technically, he was entitled to 50% of the rental income. I went very still on the phone. He wasn't asking for his payments back. He was telling me he wanted half of what Patrick paid every month going forward. Plus, he added, he and Renee had been talking. With the kids getting older and the Westerville lease coming up, it might actually make sense for them to move into the duplex. The lower unit would be perfect, he said. We could be neighbors, family close together, the way Dad would have wanted. I got off the phone and sat on my kitchen floor for a long time. I want to be clear about something. I am not a confrontational person. I was raised to keep the peace, to absorb, to smooth things over. I had watched my mother do it my entire childhood, fold herself smaller whenever Daniel took up more space, apologize for things that weren't her fault, frame his selfishness as complexity. I had inherited that instinct in full. It was my default. It was for a long time what I thought love required. But sitting on that floor, I felt something shift. Not anger, exactly. Something colder and more focused than anger. I thought about my father's hands, calloused from 30 years of actual work. I thought about the way he checked the gutters every October, climbed up there himself even when his knees hurt, because the building was his and he was going to take care of it. I thought about the legal pad Daniel had brought to the kitchen table, the way he had come prepared, the way he had already decided. He hadn't been sitting with grief at that table. He had been running numbers. I called a real estate attorney the next morning. Her name was Ms. Carver, and she had the particular efficiency of someone who had seen every version of this story before. I explained the situation. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Here is your problem, she said. He's not wrong about the title. His name is on the deed. Without a recorded instrument, a promissory note, a deed of trust, anything filed with the county, what you have is an oral agreement that he can characterize any way he wants. If he claims there was no buyout, just a gift of payments, a court will have a hard time proving otherwise. I asked her what he could actually do. She told me. A co-owner with 50% interest can petition for a partition sale, force the property to be sold, and the proceeds split. He couldn't kick me out unilaterally, but he could make staying untenable. And if he moved into the lower unit when Patrick's lease ended in 4 months, the dynamic would shift in ways that were difficult to predict. He has leverage, she said simply, and he knows it. That's why he called you instead of just filing. I thanked her, paid her consultation fee, and walked home in the gray November cold, thinking about the word leverage. Daniel had leverage because he had information I didn't have. He knew what was filed, what was recorded, what existed on paper. He had spent the months of his so-called unemployment not recovering. He had been researching. While I was managing the property, paying the taxes, fixing the water heater, maintaining everything our father had built, Daniel had been quietly mapping the legal terrain. He was not lazy. He was strategic. And he had decided that my work ethic and my instinct to absorb were assets he could continue to draw on indefinitely. I decided that if information was the weapon, I was going to become better armed. For 2 weeks, I didn't respond to his calls. I let them go to voicemail. He left messages that started warm and got progressively more transactional, first checking in, then asking about the heating bill, then mentioning, almost casually, that Renee had really been looking at floor plans for the lower unit. I listened to all of them and said nothing. I was busy. I pulled every record I could find, property tax filings, the county assessor's database, his address history through public voter registration. Then I started looking at court records, the same federal system that is publicly available to anyone who knows how to navigate it, and I searched his name. It took me less than an hour. 18 months before my father died, Daniel had been sued. A former business partner, a man he had done a side venture with, some kind of supplement distribution company, had filed a civil claim for $67,000 in unpaid loans and misappropriated funds. The case had been settled, sealed by agreement, but the initial filing was still there in the public docket. The complaint detailed a pattern: money borrowed under the pretense of shared investment, diverted to personal expenses, repaid in partial amounts to forestall legal action, then stopped entirely once the partner lost patience. I read that complaint 3 times, then I searched further. I found something smaller but more useful: a filing in Franklin County Civil Court from 2 years ago. A credit card company had obtained a default judgment against Daniel for $11,400. He had never responded to the suit. The judgment was recorded. I sat back and let the shape of things settle into focus. My brother was not between jobs. My brother was between schemes. And the duplex. My father's duplex, the building I had been maintaining and paying taxes on and waking up at midnight for when the boiler made a strange sound, was his next scheme. He needed equity. He needed an asset he could borrow against, or eventually force to sale, because the rest of his financial life was a slow-motion implosion that he had been papering over with charm and delay. He wasn't trying to be close to family. He was trying to be hot cans on $200,000. I called Miss Carver again and told her what I had found. She listened. Then she asked me a question I hadn't expected. Has he ever put anything in writing about the nature of your arrangement? Anything at all? I thought about it. And then I remembered the text message. The one he had sent the night we agreed on the payment schedule. The one typed on his phone at the kitchen table after the funeral. I still had it. I had never deleted it. I scrolled back through 14 months of messages until I found it. $15,000 over 10 months, starting Deck 1. Your payments go toward buying my share. 50% buyout, total $150,000. Once paid in full, I sign the deed over to you. Sound right? My own response below it: yes. That works. Thank you. Ms. Carver was silent for a moment when I read it to her. That, she said, is a contract. It wasn't perfectly drafted. It would not win a drafting award, but it contained the essential elements: offer, acceptance, consideration, clear terms, an amount, a timeline, a transfer of ownership upon completion. Sent from his phone number, received on mine, time-stamped and never retracted. He had written his own promissory note in a text message and then apparently forgotten it existed. Here's what I want you to do, Ms. Carver said. Don't respond to his calls. Let him escalate. I want him in writing again. I want him to make the claim that there was never a buyout agreement, that he never agreed to sell you his share. I understood. I needed him to commit to the lie on paper. It took 11 days. He sent an email, formal, almost corporate in its tone, clearly drafted with help from someone who knew just enough legal language to sound confident without being precise. It stated that our arrangement had been informal and non-binding, that no deed transfer had ever been executed, and that as a co-owner in equal standing, he was notifying me of his intention to exercise his rights regarding the property, including occupancy of the available unit upon the current tenant's lease conclusion. He had signed it with his full name. Miss Carver read the email and used a word I had never heard her use before. Perfect, she said. We scheduled a meeting at her office. I told Daniel I was ready to discuss a resolution. I said I had consulted with a real estate attorney and I wanted to do this properly, with everything documented, so there were no misunderstandings going forward. I said I was willing to be reasonable. He showed up with Renee. Renee had a specific affect in situations like this, a kind of study pleasantness that she wore like a blazer, the social equivalent of business casual. She smiled at the receptionist, complimented the office, set her bag on the table as though claiming territory. Daniel was in a button-down he usually reserved for job interviews. They had dressed for a negotiation they expected to win. Ms. Carver's office was not theatrical. No mahogany table, no city skyline, just a clean conference room with good lighting and a recorder on the table that she identified at the start, which is required under Ohio law when one party requests it. Daniel barely glanced at it. Ms. Carver opened the meeting by establishing ground rules. Everything said was on the record. Any representations made about the nature of prior agreements would be documented. We're fine with that, Daniel said. He sounded relaxed. Renee nodded. Ms. Carver slid his email across the table. She asked him to confirm it was accurate, that there had been no binding agreement between us regarding the transfer of his ownership interest. He confirmed it, clearly, on the record. He said the payments I had made were not buyout installments but voluntary contributions, informal support between siblings during a shared transition period, with no legal obligation attached on either side. Renee said, exactly, and I watched her fold her hands. Miss Carver nodded. She opened a folder. The first document she placed on the table was the text message thread, printed in full, time-stamped, with his phone number at the top of every message he sent. She placed it face up in front of him. He looked at it. I watched his face do something I had never seen it do before. The confidence didn't drain, it fractured. Like a windshield hit at exactly the right angle. Still intact, but suddenly full of lines. "That's just a text," he said. His voice had changed register. "It contains offer, acceptance, and consideration," Ms. Carver said pleasantly. "Under Ohio contract law, it satisfies the elements of a binding agreement. You just confirmed on record that no such agreement existed. That is a direct contradiction of this document." Renee uncrossed her legs. The second document went on top of the first. It was a payment history, every transfer I had made, 14 months of records, each entry with the date, the amount, and a note I had attached at the time. I had written buyout payment, per agreement, on every single one. I hadn't known why I was doing that when I started. Some instinct, some echo of my father's carefulness. I was glad for it now. "These records," Ms. Carver said, "corroborate the text message. They demonstrate consistent performance under the terms of the agreement you sent." Daniel put his hand flat on the table. "I want a minute with my wife." "Of course," Ms. Carver said. She didn't move. He looked at her, privately. "You're welcome to step into the hallway," she said. "The recording will remain active in this room." They went into the hallway. I sat still. "Ms. Murge." Carver poured water and slid a glass toward me. I didn't drink it. I just looked at the documents on the table, the text he had sent sitting underneath the payment records I had kept, and I thought about my father's kitchen table, the yellow legal pad, the pen Daniel had brought. He had come prepared that day. So would I today. They came back in 4 minutes. Daniel sat down. Something in his posture had changed. He was still straight-backed, still performing composure, but the thing underneath was different. He looked like a man who had just recalculated a problem and not liked the new answer. "What exactly are you asking for, Nora?" I had thought carefully about this moment. I had thought about what I wanted to say, what I wanted him to understand, whether any version of this would make him feel what he had done to our father's memory. I had rehearsed several versions of a speech. I didn't give any of them. "I'm asking you to honor the agreement you made," I said. "Sign the deed transfer. I'll pay the remaining balance of what we agreed, $15,000, which I have ready, and we close this out today. If you refuse, we litigate. Ms. Carver will file for specific performance on the contract. We'll submit the text message and payment records, and we'll add a quiet title action to establish the full history of the arrangement. We'll also request that the court take judicial notice of the civil judgment against you from Franklin County and the prior lawsuit filed by your former business partner, which establishes a pattern of entering financial arrangements and defaulting on them." I paused. "I don't want to do that," I said. "I don't want to stand in front of a judge and explain to a stranger who our father was and what he spent his life building and how you tried to take it. But I will. I have the documentation, and I will." The room was very quiet. Renee said nothing. For the first time since I had known her, she had nothing to say. Daniel looked at the table, then he looked at me. Really looked, the way he hadn't in years. I don't know what he was looking for. I don't know if he found it. I wasn't looking back with anything soft anymore. "Fine," he said. It came out smaller than any word I'd ever heard him say. Miss Carver produced the deed transfer paperwork. It had been prepared in advance. She notarized it in the room. I transferred the final $15,000 from my phone before the ink was dry. He didn't look at me when he signed. Renee was already putting her coat on. At the door, Daniel paused. He turned halfway, not quite facing me. "Dad would have wanted us to work this out," he said. I thought about my father on the roof in October with his calloused hands checking the gutters. I thought about the leak under the bathroom sink. I thought about 30 years of care and maintenance that produced something real, a building, an inheritance, a foundation, that Daniel had tried to convert into a withdrawal. "He did work it out," I said. "He left it to both of us. I did my part. You know what you did with yours." The door closed. I sat in Miss Carver's conference room for a few minutes after they left. She didn't rush me. She refilled my water glass. Outside the window, Columbus was gray and cold and ordinary, and I felt not triumphant, not particularly happy, just solid. Like a floor that had been tested and held. The deed transferred without incident. Patrick renewed his lease for another year. I repaired the back stairs in the spring and planted the same rose bushes along the fence that my father had kept for 20 years, because he had liked the way they looked from the street and nobody else was going to put them back. Daniel and I have not spoken since. I don't expect that to change. I know some people will say I should have found a way to keep the family together, that blood matters, that our father would have grieved the silence between us. But here is what I know about my father. He kept records, he maintained things. He showed up every October with his calloused hands because he understood that care is not a feeling, it is a practice, and it requires showing up even when no one is watching. Daniel watched our father do that for 30 years and learned nothing from it. I watched the same man and learned everything. The building is mine now. Fully, legally, on paper, in the county records, in the way that holds up in court and in life. I fixed the gutters myself last October. My arms ached, and I scraped my palm on the gutter edge, and I sat on the roof afterward in the cold for a while, looking at Elmwood Avenue. I thought it would feel different, bigger, more like victory, and less like this quiet, permanent thing I couldn't quite name. But then I thought, maybe this is what my father felt up here. Not triumph, not power, just the particular satisfaction of a person who did what needed to be done, who kept what was worth keeping, who refused to let the thing she loved be taken apart by someone who only knew how to subtract. I climbed back down. I checked the gutters. They were clear. If you believe that protecting what you've built is not selfishness, it is survival, hit subscribe and leave me a comment. Would you have taken it to court, or would you have let it go to keep the peace?